My presentation, I put the title Digital Generations from the Life Course Perspective. I wasn't really sure whether I want to keep it like this, but I think it brings on the table, the two main concepts that I've been actually thinking about the relations recently. How I should be dealing with the digital, the concept of generation, and on the other hand, the life course studies approach, and how they could be combined, to reach somehow more comprehensive understanding of how people are using digital technology and how they differ from each other, in terms of the ICT or digital technology use. So my name is Sakari Taipale. I'm coming from Jyväskylä University. This is again, something that I haven't done ever before. Call to me. I've never done any marketing about my university, but now I do because I'm first time here. So I just put it to 2 slides to say, what kind of a university the University of Jyväskylä is. We call this the JYU in short. We are a multidisciplinary university. We don't have the faculties of law or medicine, but almost everything else. So I'm located in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. It's now the new faculty. We used to have a separate Faculty of Social Sciences where I was affiliated, but then we were merged a bit, and we became a huge Faculty of Human Sciences and Social Sciences. We also teach, the information technology. We have a business school, education psychology. Sports sciences is the only faculty in Finland where it's the sports studies are actually taught. And it's interesting also perhaps for you who are studying the aging people, because they're also studying a lot of how the older people are actually doing in terms of their physical health, and what kind of also what kind of technologies could be used there, to support their aging. I don't know very well, the work of that faculty, but there's some interesting projects going on around the topic of aging. And there's the mathematics and sciences. But coming back to who I am and what I'm doing and how I'm, to which kind of research groups I'm related, I wanted to, this is also something quite new for us. We have used to identify ourselves through the disciplines and the departments in the past. But now, the university and our faculty, we are moving more towards the research groups, as I see you are doing here, talking all the time about the research groups. I'm a member of this group and that group. We have 2 research groups where I'm actually involved. The one is the research group on care policy. We have a long tradition of studying these topics of care and care provision, and we have been, and the group is actually studying the whole sphere of care, the informal care, formal care and things like that. Different user groups, provider sectors, how it's organized, the different degrees of formalization. And then all the things that are actually linked to care, or linked with care. Gender issues, housing, living environments, and technology. Technology is one of the aspects. And here is the marketing piece, which is really still hot, but you have almost heard about this. We got this new Center of Excellence, which is starting next year, where we have the one research group that is studying the new technologies as part of the aging and care provision. And that's going to be something quite great, because we have a huge group of people from different backgrounds. Now we are, and with the different, kind of a research history, we have people who have only studied the care, care policies and practices, and haven't done anything on technology. And then we have people who have done only technology studies, but haven't studied, the care provision at all. And then we have people who have studied migration, and problems related to migration. And now we bring them into the same research center, or this research network of, and we try to see how the immigration is actually, linked to the care provision and the problems that the aging people have, receiving care, and how the immigrants are aging in the societies, and what kind of a resource the immigrants are also, and how the immigrants are using technology to organize their care, in the transnational context and so on. So this is the first research group that I kind of feel that I'm part of. And then the other one is what we call the Digital Life Research Group. This is also something that it was recently kind of formalized. You know, we have been doing these things for a long time, but it's the multidisciplinary group, you know, which is hosted by my Department of Social Sciences and Philosophy. But we have people from business school, from psychology, from gerontology, from ethnographers, you know, who are working with us. And you know, we are really studying the whole life, you know, how the human life course is digitalizing. We have projects looking at the consumption patterns, how the people are consuming digital technologies, how their lifestyles are modified by the digital technologies, applications, mobile media, and so on. Then we have the aspect of the health and well-being studies. We have people involved from that sector. We have been studying the mobility issues myself. I have a background, you know, publishing in the what they call the new mobilities paradigm that was established in the UK some decade or 15 years ago. I've been following that, and then we have a strong line of sustainable development research. That's one of the kind of a cross-cutting themes nowadays in our department. We look at the sustainability issues. And people studying relationships between the home and family, and time research. We do time use research, and so on. So it's quite a big, huge network, people studying the different aspect of digital life in the everyday life context. Well, the topic itself today, you know, actually it relates to this book. You know, I have already the cover available. The contents are there as well, but they are still under the technical editing and typesetting, you know, so I don't have the book with me as a printed copy yet. It's coming out in the August. But the book actually started as a kind of internal observation at the department, that we found that, you know, we have a lot of people actually doing studies where they are addressing the digital technology use in different contexts of life, and also, you know, having either, you know, the perspective of aging or of the life course or the generations. You know, we found, you know, from our own department many projects, I think 3-4 projects that address these themes at the same time, and we realized we have to organize something together, you know, just to learn about ourselves. And then, you know, that we wanted to also bring to the same seminar, you know, our own networks. You know, we invited people from our own networks from different countries to this workshop. We actually had a short version of this. We call this a golden age, golden technologies. International workshop on generations, life course and digital technologies. We organized it in November 2015, and the book is now kind of the final outcome. We put we wrote the quite a good number of chapters that we then organized into this edited volume, and it's now finally coming out. Kind of a starting point, so the premises of the book that we had when we started to organize it was that, you know, we think that there's studies about the media generations. There's some studies about the relevance of the ICTs for kind of a generational consciousness or at least for the personal identity. But we kind of wanted to really took this idea that both the ICT devices, but now also all kind of applications and softwares and the media products, the whole kind of spectrum of the ICT and media related stuff, you know, are kind of important building blocks for our generational consciousness. So we kind of define to what we belong, you know, through these things. Of course, there's other things that matter, but, you know, nowadays the ICTs are quite important. They're also mediating lots of other things, you know, other events, you know, global phenomena, you know, through the media, through the mobile phones. We experience what is happening around the world. So they kind of contribute to the we sense, you know, who we are, you know, and to what kind of a group we belong to. But then at the same time, we think that actually, if you look at the studies, there are many studies that you know, take the kind of what some would call as a fetishism, or, you know, some kind of obsessive relationship to the very stark, you know, clearly cut generational distinctions. They want to distinct, you know, between the you know, the digital native and the immigrants, that there's some kind of a clear cut, you know, between the generations, or there are the whatever social media generation that is completely different from something else, or that there is a MTV generation or whatever. And there are multiple different kind of conceptualizations of the ICT related generations. And we think that, you know, well, they have some strengths, you know, they have some pros, you know, why we should, you know, use them, but they also have some limitations. And then we started to think that, you know, what is actually neglected, what we omit, what we overlook, you know, if we kind of stick to these generational stereotypes and start taking them for granted, you know, what do we kind of ignore? And what could be done differently? And we found that the life course approach, actually, if it's combined with the generation, you know, thinking, could be something that takes us a bit forward. So just to go a bit back, you know, when all started, you know, to understand what we are talking about, the starting there, of course, you know, in the whole generation discourse and the theories is the Karl Mannheim's this classical notion of the publication, the problem of generation. There are a few things that are now crucial, I think, also related to ICTs. One of the key things there is that he sees that the youth as a period is somehow key, you know, because it's a transformative period that produces the generational consciousness. So when a person is kind of maturing, you know, reaching the age of youth and the teenage years, so start to reflect what is happening around and start to associate, you know, and they start to kind of create the understanding that, you know, to what is the group, you know, where I belong to, and they form kind of a generational experience when they are young. And then there's the idea that, you know, this sense of who I am and to what group I belong actually continues, and they carry it along, you know, when they age. Well, there's some provisions that he makes as well. He says that, you know, that all people do not necessarily share, you know, the same experience and historical events, although they are born in the same period of time and they experience the same events. Because of many things, you know, of course, you know, there are stratifications, different kind of stratifications in the society, and that's why this generational identity may also stay kind of underdeveloped. You know, there are groups of people who don't, you know, feel that they belong to the same generation for some reason or the other. And then the generation may become stratified. You know, it can be stratified by the class or, you know, the gender or whatever. And it's not always the coherent thing, the generation. And then there is the other thing is that he argues the major historical transformations are actually likely to occur when the time accelerate, when there are the times of accelerated social change. So when something very important happens quickly, you know, like a war, so, you know, or some scientific breakthroughs, you know, the people are landing on the moon or something. So they are kind of a cornerstone, so kind of that people associate with and say, well, we experienced this, we are part of this generation, we have something similar. So is this kind of a sufficient basis, you know, also to understand the digital generations, or, you know, generations of ICT users? Well, we have some doubts, you know, and let's go into those things. The one thing is that you know, actually today's the technologies, they have a very short life, you know, span. We know that the mobile phones, you know, generations are not like the human generations that last for 30 years, and you know, but they are very short. And you know, during the kind of the length of the human generation, which is more or less like 30 years, you know, people experience a series of different, you know, technological, you know, waves, you know, and they have to kind of rethink their relationship to the technologies many times. So it's not so solid basis, you know, to build the technology, but you have to continuously, you know, rethink your relationship with the technological development. So it's not like in the past, if you think the radio, you know, or the time the time gap between when the radio was introduced, you know, 20s, 30s, and then the television was the next one that came 30 years later, you know, 50s, 60s, and then when the digital technologies came, another 30 years later. But now the new technological, you know, kind of breakthroughs, or, you know, new technology generations actually come just within 2 or 3 years, you know, time span, and it's something that makes us, you know, work, you know, a lot, you know, as a users, you know, to understand who we are, you know, what kind of technologies we want to relate ourselves, and so on. Even now, especially if you look the younger people nowadays, you know, if you have the kids, or you know, that have a age difference of 5 years or 10, to say nothing about 10 years, but you know, they're already using a different technology. You know, somebody may say that, you know, I'm using the WhatsApp, but the younger one says, oh well, that's so outdated, you know, it's now the Snapchat or something like that. And it's, you know, they come at a very quick space, and even the 5 years, you know, of age difference might be crucial for kids to think that they are different as a generation. So in this book, you know, one of the key themes, I think, is this aspect of time, you know, that the technologies are kind of coming, the new technologies are coming with a shorter cycle, but at the same time it's really challenging to study the digital generation, because we know that to develop this we sense, you know, the generational identity, it takes time. And like the Göran Bulin in this, you know, in this book writes, that, you know, the kind of older people have always the advantage, you know, of understanding who they are, because they have lived longer, you know. They have had more time to understand and reflect who they are and to what kind of a generation they belong. But the younger users, you know, of technology, they still might need more time, you know, to even understand whether they are similar to, you know, or whether they belong to the, you know, certain group or the other group. And it's probably only when the time passes, you know, and they get older, you know, when they understand who they are and what kind of a technological generation they are, if you ask them. Well, but this would be quite, you know, boring outcome of the book to say that, well, we need more time to understand what is the digital generation. We have to wait and see, you know, how the young people consider themselves as a generation. You know, let's wait for 15, 20 years. Well, that's not the whole story. Well, the things that the book kind of reveals, that are the kind of advantages of the pros of the classic generational analysis, is that when there is the kind of a new big shift, I would say, you know, technological shift or transformation, like when in the 1980s and 1990s, when the personal, you know, computers and ICTs, you know, really arrived, there was a clear generational distinction, you know, at that time between those who had the technology and used it and those who were completely, you know, outsiders, you know, who didn't know, who didn't understand, you know, what's happening there. But then when the time has passed, you know, this distinction has really blurred, and it has become much more complex. We all know, who are studying, that there are discourses of the second divide or the third digital divide and so on. So when something big happens, like the Karl Mannheim said, you know, that there's times of accelerated, you know, social change, it might create kind of a generational consciousness and divide generations. The interesting paper in the book is the Leslie Haddon's chapter. Actually, Leslie went to do his old data sets that he you know, they collected for these domestication studies, and he kind of reanalyzed what kind of a generational understanding, you know, the people at that time had, you know, about the digital technologies. So we have to look on to see my notes. I don't speak now. Yeah. So he actually went there and found out that there is still, you know, his studies that were done in the 1990s, but they continued them for a couple of years. He found that actually the earlier life experiences in that data set shape the adaptation and the use of today's ICTs very much, or actually the lack of the experiences. So the people they interviewed in the 1990s, who were, I don't know, around 65 something, you know, above, who had experienced or who had lacked this experience of having new technologies in their childhood. They didn't have the television, or they lacked the access to these technologies that were, you know, new technologies when they were young. You know, they were still reflecting the same experiences when the ICTs came, and they didn't feel it easy, you know, to pick up them. there was something similar, you know, related to the language, you know, that the language was actually used in the when they were young, you know, in the TV shows and so on, were still affecting, you know, they still reflected that, you know, in the post-war, you know, TV series, you know, there was certain kind of style and language that had changed, you know, with the increased violence in the TV shows, or much more sexual acts, or, you know, that kind of improper language, you know, that was used, and they felt it very different, you know, still today. They said that this old experience is actually still, well, the Leslie kind of concluded that this old experiences, generational experiences, are still there, you know. They share it, you know, the older people, you know, still in the 1990s, and they didn't like the new media in that sense because it was so different. So yeah, well, there is some generational well, there's some space for the classic generational analysis, definitely, yes. It's not completely outdated and useless, not at all. But then, you know, the book actually starts to kind of reveal, you know, that there's increasingly this this mixing or blurring of the generational divides. There are lots of empirical examples. I just pick up some of them here. The one is related to it's actually it's a survey-based, kind of a longitudinal survey-based study from Finland. You know, my colleagues Terjana Vilska and Sanna Kuoppamäki from Jyväskylä, who they have, well, we have this data available that is collected together with other university, which is dealing with the consumption kind of a behavior from the early 1990s until 2014. There are 4, you know, different waves of this survey. And they studied how this perceived necessity of ICTs, how necessary people think that ICT are there for their life. They found that actually the generational gaps clearly evened out, you know, in terms of the necessity of the mobile phone, internet, and well, and yeah, the mobile phone, PC, and the internet. They found that there was clearly a big kind of vanishing of the generational gap, you know, within this time frame. The only thing that actually existed was this gap, you know, between the pre and the post Second World War generation. So the very, very old, you know, were still different to all those who were born after the Second World War. But other, you know, age cohorts, you know, had actually the similarity in this perceived necessity had increased, you know, when the time passed from the 90s to 2014s. So the gaps are smaller between the generation. And then the other aspect that I'm really, you know, keen personally is this intergenerational cooperation. There are many studies that then show that actually the generations, well, they might be different in terms of the adoption of some technologies even, but then, you know, they develop certain strategies, you know, within the families especially, that are kind of trying to actually bring, you know, the family members of different generations closer together. There's a chapter, you know, of Leopoldina Fortunati who studied who used the students' kind of diaries, or, well, they're not diaries, they're kind of study assignments, written assignments, where the students actually observed, you know, how their grandparents are using technology. And she concludes that actually there is using this phrase of digital housekeeping, you know, the kind of that the managing the digital technologies and all related to, you know, of their use and maintaining, you know, they as operational, you know, is actually demanding that kind of intergenerational division of labor, you know, that young people help, you know, the older parents, you know, or the grandparents in the use of digital technology very regularly, actually, in some countries. And that's kind of increasing the solidarity or some kind of a sense of coherence within the family. And it's also kind of lowering the boundaries between the generations, because they help each other, you know, in these daily practices of this what can be called as a kind of unpaid, you know, voluntary, you know, domestic labor, you know, which is actually largely still done by you know, men in the household. It's kind of a masculine form of work in this still. Well, that's the one sample or one example of the kind of closening of the different generations within the family. Then there's a study that I did with my Slovenian colleagues, Andras Petrovic and Vesna Dolničar, where we studied, we collected the material from what they call the extended, families, using the students as a kind of a key informants who then first they observed, the use of technology in their family relations, and then they interviewed, their at least 5 different family members of their extended families, regarding the 3 different questions, concerning the what technologies they use, what kind of family roles, how they think that the digital technology is affecting their family roles and so on. And what we found that actually there was that first of all there's a huge cultural differences how the families are organized and how they use the digital technology. The big thing there was that how much I have time, by the way?
It's 37 past 8.
Okay. Okay. Well, because I can talk like for hours, but you have to just.
I don't know the rest.
Okay.
Having a lot of fun, so keep
Okay. So great if you enjoy at least a little bit. So the great cultural variation. This interesting thing that we found, and we have to dig deeper into it, was that, well, if you think of Slovenia, there's a lot of families of like what you can call some multi-generation families. The 3 or even 4 generations are living under the same roof. And then Finland is completely the opposite. The children move out at a very young age. It's supported by the governments, all kind of benefits programs. So you can really start your independent life at the very early stage. You get the study benefit, you get the house accommodation benefits, and it's quite often so that when you have finished your we call the comprehensive school, the primary and secondary school, you are able, if you want, with the government's benefits, to move out and hire, a study flat and move to other cities. So the kids kind of fly, from the childhood families at a very early age, and we don't have the multi-generational families. And what is also typical is that there's the distance between these extended families, then between the children, grown-up children, and their parents and the grandparents are really, huge. The country, we have not so many people living there, but the distances are very long, So we counted some average distances between the parents and their children and grandchildren was like 150 kilometers on the average, between the parents and children, in many cases in these families. So these differences actually create a different demand for the technology, So while in the Slovenia, these key informants and the interviewers, their family members, they describe that, well, why should we use, the WhatsApp to stay in touch with the family? Because we can go to the upstairs and say hello to the mother or the grandmother. And, it was kind of completely different from the Finland, where now the WhatsApp actually, and also, well, in the other countries as well, but especially in Finland, the WhatsApp has become a kind of a tool of the families to stay in touch, when they are living their separate, lives in different locations. So, but any case, in both, countries, we call them as a proxy use or warm experts, as Maria Pakachieva has termed them, that there was this kind of a warm expert, the younger family members, whether they lived in the same household or, far away, they worked as a kind of a warm expert, helping their parents or the grandparents, in the use of ICTs. But in the Slovenia, they used much more, they helped much more and much more regularly because they lived so nearby. And they complained, of course, that when the distances, is long in the Finland between the grandparents, it's really difficult, to help grandparent, over the phone or over the mobile phone, how to use the internet, or if they have problems, you should be there, beside, sitting beside your grandparents or parents to help them. So there was a interesting differences, but at the same time we found that in the both countries there was this kind of a new intergenerational cooperation, that there's a willingness of the young people to help their parents and the grandparents in the youth. In the Finland, much less help for the grandparents. The grandchildren and the grandparents were much more kind of a socially distant from each other, while in the Slovenia they were much closer, and the help provision was much more intensive. We collected the same data also from Italy, and Italy seems to be somewhere in between these two extremes. But I haven't had time to analyze it very carefully yet. And then there's a very different type of in terms of the context, there's a very different type of a text from Sirpa Tenhunen, who, as I said, is an anthropologist and studied the mobile communication in rural India. I kind of encourage her, to come into the book, because all the other contributions are from Europe, and we know that in India, the generation is not a concept that is kind of used to describe the hierarchies or social categorizations within the society, because there it's more the gender and the caste, the caste system that are used as a basis of social hierarchies. So I said, well, look at your data, because Sirpa has studied, like, I don't know, for 15 years, the same village, and the use in the rural India, how the people are using the mobile phone there. And it's actually quite interesting that there in the rural area, it was not the young people who owned the mobile phone, but it was the older, the parents, who were illiterate, who couldn't use them, basically for many things, and they needed really, children to help them using the mobile phone. So there also we found that actually, the mobile phone was a kind of challenging the classical hierarchies, because the older people, the older family members, they needed young people to learn and to use the mobile phones. And actually it kind of, the Sirpa actually presents the three generations of the mobile, I think 3 generations of the technology or the mobile phone use generations in India as well. But this was, I think, one of the interesting things, that it's also kind of blurring the classical divisions, the social divisions in the society. Well, this is kind of a step further then, the generational boundaries are blurring and they're becoming more complex in a sense. But then there are also studies, in the book that argue that, well, in some cases, the life course aspect, the life course effect is actually much more stronger than the generational divisions. So there's the kind of idea that it's not the people's relation to technology that would be only kind of determined or defined by their generational identity, but actually their current life stage is really a strong kind of shaper of their generational understanding, because they are continuously, rethinking who they are and to what they belong. And the other argument here is kind of a challenging now the classical, Mannheimian concept is that actually each stage of life, not only the youth, seems to shape these generational experiences and identity. Well, you will see some examples. And this is the final. Actually, I think this might be the direct quotation from the conclusive chapter. Is that we kind of argue that the collective attitudes also, that the particular age group or the cohort, has towards and experiences of digital technologies can serve as a kind of potential markers, for the generational differences, and thus they kind of allow the redrawing the generational lines, also into later life. So we don't think that the generational identity is something that's fixed, I mean, in terms when we're thinking about technology use, that would be somehow fixed in the youth. You get a certain basic understanding who we are, when we are young, but then in the later phases of the line, you have to kind of redraw, or kind of consider, who I am and to with whom I'm using the technology in the same ways and the same manners and for the same purposes. The one of the I think the best, the most kind of well, let's say the most obvious example of this is the chapter from Carla Canito. You know, you probably know her studies about the life. Well, she used the concept of trajectory, like a bit like a Bourdieu type of conceptualization, looking how actually the women users of the mobile phone in Portugal, well, her argument, basic argument in my reading of it is that actually the mobile phone is kind of an important part of their life, through, you know, for women's life throughout the life course. You know, it doesn't really matter whether they are young or old. The mobile phone is important. It's a crucial part they are really dependent on. But you know what is the difference there is that it serves the different needs, you know, of people in different life stages. So the idea is actually, you know, and this kind of feeds the idea, you know, that we have in the whole book, is that the relationship between the user's age and the engagement with the technology is kind of a non-linear. We don't think like easily. Somebody could argue that, you know, the young people are really engaged and they're really, you know, savvy with the technology. And then when they age, you know, their skills and interests start dropping. And when they are really old and old, you know, in the fourth age, they are completely outside the game, you know. They don't use anything and they are just under the technological, you know, surveillance and very passive actors in this game. But we said that actually it's non-linear. It's going up and down depending on the life stage and your needs. And Carla's paper is actually chapter is there very good because she shows that how the certain functions of the mobile phone activates, you know, in different stages of life. She makes the kind of categorization of, she kind of categorizes the women in the certain boxes in a sense, which are quite strict, but she has, you know, she looks the mothers, well, she looks differently the single mothers and then the mothers who are living with a partner. For the mothers, actually the mobile phone, the main reason was related to safety and the control of their children, you know. They want to control the children and their safety through the phone, you know. It's a kind of a leash, you know, that you have over the kids. And then she used the other category, she used the single dependent women. So by this she means the women who are still living, you know, with their parents, who are kind of dependent on their parents, but you know, the teenagers or, you know, girls or the women in their 20s or so on. For them it's clearly the autonomy, you know, because they're dependent on their parents, they live with their parents, you know. The phone is the kind of a way to reach certain kind of a space, you know, and the private connections, and to be an autonomic actor, you know, in their life. So that is for mature independence, you know, independent women. So they're already grown up, they're dependent on their parents, they are moving to the working life or they are studying, but they are somehow independent economically. For them it's the accessibility that actually matters. They want to be accessible for others, they want to access, you know, their friends and engage in some kind of a romantic relationships and things like that. Well, for the single mothers, you know, it's a bit different than for the mothers in general. She says that there's combination between accessibility and control, because, you know, if you're a single mother, you know, you want to control your children, but at the same time, you know, you want to use the mobile phone to get some, you know, to kind of maintain your, you know, relationships with your friends and colleagues, and have your own part of life, you know, and more own independent part of life. And then the one category, what she calls the empty nesters, you know, those women whose, you know, either children have already left their home, or who actually, this really means that the nest is empty. So she also looks at women who are widowed or have separated, so they are living the independent life. For them it's more the autonomy and safety, you know, they are normally a bit older than the others, so they want to be an autonomic and so on. So it's the different things at the different stages of life that activate the need and the use of the mobile phone. And then there's the Jane Vincent. I pick up this still, you know, this morning into my slideshow. We're going through again, you know, what was written in the different chapters. It was the Jane Vincent's chapter. Jane is, well, you know, the Jane's studies about the electronic emotions and emotional attachment to technologies. And I actually found the kind of something similar, you know, that she underlines there, that there is actually the change argument in the paper is that, well, there is space for both generational, well, that there are kind of two axes. The generation is the one aspect or the axis that we should study when we want to use how the people are actually adopting the technology. But then there is the, well, that's more like a collective, you know, behavior and how we group people together. And then, you know, if we want to look at the life course, you know, it's more like an individual thing, how people are relating to technology. And she studies then, you know, how the people at different age are actually emotionally attached to the mobile phones. And what she kind of founds and argues is that actually, well, the ways that the people and the reasons they're using the mobile phones might be different depending on the age, but actually they are similarly attached, you know, to the mobile phones as a response of being in contact with whomever they want and anywhere and at any moment. So that's the similar thing, you know, that it's the same, well, kind of a need that creates the emotional reaction irrespectively of the age, you know. It doesn't matter, you know, which generation you belong, but you feel this attachment to the technology. I have some couple, 2-3 slides, and then we probably can discuss something, so I don't need to keep this monologue, you know, until the midnight or something. Well, then, one of the aspects of the book and one of the sections there was the consumption of the lifestyles. I also picked up something, you know, on that topic into this presentation. Well, there are studies that actually showing that the perception of the digital technology seems to, especially the digital domestic, what we call the domestic or technologies, seem to alter, you know, between the life stages, but not so much by generation and age. There's an interesting, well, this is the project that we had with I was also involved in the project. It was called the 50 plus. You know, we looked at how the 50 plus, you know, people were actually consuming material and immaterial, material and digital, you know, stuff in their lives. And we compared, and we wanted to focus on this 50 plus age group because they are kind of something between, you know, the old and the young people, but they as a consumer group, they're also very wealthy, you know. They have a lot of resources, they have lots of potential to consume, but they are not so often, you know, directly kind of directly targeted by the companies or marketing staff, you know, who and we wanted to see that how this group, you know, actually is consuming, and the study of this Sanna Kuopama, it's our PhD student. I'm supervising her with Terhi-Anna Vilska, and then, you know, the two colleagues from the business school from Jyväskylä University. They as part of this 50 plus project, they collected the qualitative kind of a group interview data. It was every year in Finland there's a big what they call the housing fairs, you know. They every year organized in a different city, and they build the whole new region, you know, of new buildings. Normally they are private houses, but also, you know, all kind of houses, you know, apartment houses as well, and the semi-detached and detached houses, all kinds of things, and where they introduce the new housing technology and things like that. And this year there was also lots of when they did this, I think 2015, there was a lot of new technology, you know, the smart technology, home technology. There was a robot, the robot car that was actually operating in the area, and they went to study there, you know, the collecting material, how this 50 plus, you know, late middle agers, as we categorize the late middle agers, how they differ from the young, you know, people as the consumers, and how they found these smart home electronics, smart home technologies, you know, there. And well, they present in this study, in this book, that, you know, actually when they compare the young adults actually concerned that this kind of smart home technologies, you know, thinking the surveillance technology, you know, the digital, you know, the locking systems and all kind of stuff, you know, that for the younger adults they highlighted the risk of privacy and independence. And we tried to kind of And in this chapter, they kind of well, not contrast, but parallel this with the risk of privacy that the young adults actually associate quite often with the social media. That there was a similar kind of idea that, you know, if you know, some kind of smart technologies are installed in my private house, you know, they were a bit afraid that, you know, they lose their privacy and independence and somebody's watching, you know, what is happening there. While then the late Middle Agers actually considered these smart technologies, digital home technologies, more as something that is actually difficult to manage and control. You know, they were afraid that it's something that they cannot, you know, deal with. Not so much that they would, you know, lose their privacy or independence, but they, well, the son and the colleagues in this chapter, they argue that this is actually not so much a generational, you know, issue, but it's related to the life stage, because, you know, the young people in their life stage, they are much more concerned about these social networks and the privacy issues, and they want their independence, while, you know, the older people, you know, who are getting probably with the age, they are getting kind of you know, also cognitive challenges and motoric challenges of mobility. They start feeling that they don't know how to control the stuff, you know, how to control the new technology, how to manage them when they are aging. And all this actually, what I think is one of the interesting things in the book, and I owe, you know, much for this idea, you know, for the Chris Gillard, who was the one of the editors, is the idea that, you know, could we start actually thinking that this kind of a difference between the active consumption of digital technologies at the later life is a kind of a sign of what sometime, you know, in the gerontology they call as successful aging. That, you know, those who remain as an active, you know, users of digital technology are increasingly started to be considered as a kind of people who are aging successfully, because they can keep up with the technological divide. And in that sense, would it be a kind of one indicator for the line between the third age and the fourth age? You know, when you're starting to reach the fourth age, you know, you kind of become a passive target of the technology, and you are just thank you, just like controlled, you know, by the technology. While in the third age, you can still be the active, you know, actor in the game. Well, this is the conclusive slide, you know, the where we want to end up with the book. So we don't want to give up, you know, the Mannheimian approach. It's not our idea to say that he was completely wrong. Actually, there's a lot of we can use still, you know. But we want to combine that with the life course kind of analysis to understand the while, you know, each generation ages, you know, and they reach the different life stages, they have to reconsider, you know, their role, their relationship with the technology again and again and again. And then the question, of course, is that whether, you know, the generation remains as a coherent in terms of their generational identity, or is it somehow splitting into smaller parts, because, you know, the sum of the baby boomers, they become the active, you know, adapters, and they start to consider that, yes, we as a baby boomers, you know, we can keep up, we can go to the social media, we can stay in touch, you know, with the grandchildren using the WhatsApp or whatever, Facebook. And then there are those who don't follow this trend, and they have a different perception, a different understanding of who we are as a baby boomers. So it's not only the youth that matters, I would say, you know, based on this book, you know, when we're talking about generations, the kind of a digital generations or technology generations. So what we call this as a post-Mannheimian approach, you know, it's both acknowledges the impact of life course events for the technological, you know, identity or relationship with technology, but also views that the generational identity kind of shapes up, you know, in a non-linear ways, also in the later stages of life. One of the things that we kind of repeated, you know, when we were editing and doing the book was that, well, yeah, it is especially when the children, you know, move out from the home, or when the grandchildren are actually born, that matters, you know, that those are one kind of a watershed when people start changing their use of technology, because they want to keep up, you know, with their children, and they move out, so they take up the new technologies, or then they don't. But that's one of the critical points. And the other one is when the grandchildren are actually born. So that kind of a transition point in the life course that matters, you know, that may kind of activate the people to start using the new technologies or new applications. But you know, oh no, you know, the challenge there is that these short-lived digital technologies and applications, they provide quite kind of a unstable or unsolid, you know, ground for building very well-defined or strong generational identity. And that's why actually we might still need more time to find out whether, you know, all new generations actually can define themselves as some kind of a separate generations, or is it some kind of a big digital generation that is internally somehow fragmented, or what's happening. But nevertheless, I would say that whatever they consider themselves after 10 or 15 years, it will definitely change when they, you know, when they grow up and when they age. That's it. Thank you for being here.